Okay, guitar students, music geeks of all stripes, whether you play guitar or not, video game fans, I suppose. We're going to be talking today about the hidden, not so hidden after this, music theory behind one of the most classic video game themes ever. That is the overworld theme or the main theme for Legend of Zelda. So I'm Brett Miller from Metal Guitar Academy. Now, I'm sure there's a million videos out there where people are showing you the metal version of how to play Zelda, and it's like, that's not what this is about. I'm probably not going to be able to contribute much more to that. I'm sure that's been done a million times. But what we're going to do, which is much more interesting to me and hopefully you, talking about the actual kind of creative impulse, the material, the music theory behind what makes this theme so cool. Video game themes, I think, are often not used enough to teach some of this stuff because we're so steeped in that music culturally. Okay, for a couple generations at least now at this point. So, going to break it down. This has a lot to do with scales and chords. So we're going to be doing a pretty in-depth discussion of scales and chords. So if you're new to this, great, because we're going to start with some very foundational things. And if you're not, you'll probably learn something anyway, because a lot of times people miss things along the way when it comes to this. So let's get started. Okay, so I mentioned that this has a lot to do with scales and chords. So what is a scale? What is a chord? These are terms that musicians and guitar players throw around quite a bit, and a lot of times they don't really know what they mean. So we're going to be talking about this. So let's start with scales. Is a scale just a series of notes, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, okay, that you have to stare at and somehow memorize by rote so that one day you can call it to the tip of your tongue and your fingertips right away? Not really. That's kind of the secondary result of what a scale really is. So it's important to understand this on a very foundational level. So here's the deal. The question is, what is a scale really at the most foundational level? And another way to put this is, what makes a type of scale sound unique? In other words, if I just grabbed the guitar and I played something like this, even if you don't know that that's called a major scale, say you don't play an instrument or you're just not aware of that, guaranteed you're going to recognize that sound, right? We've heard that about 10 billion times ever since we're born. Now, if I play that exact same thing somewhere else, has a very similar sound, doesn't it? So here's what a scale really is. It is a pattern, a unique pattern of whole steps and half steps. Whole steps and half steps are just two of what we call an interval in music. An interval is the distance in sound or pitch between two notes. So we can have a lot of possible intervals here. Okay? Play any note, kind of jump some other note. It's going to give you a certain unique sound that we call an interval. Half step and whole step, however, are our two smallest intervals. So on the guitar, if you just move by one fret, that's the sound of a half step. If you move by 2 frets, that's the sound of a whole step. Now, by pattern of whole steps and half steps, here's what I mean. Check this out. I'm going to play a note right there. I don't even care if you know what the name of that note is. I'm going to play a series of whole steps and half steps here. I played whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That is what a major scale really is. I call that the master pattern. Okay? If I plop my finger down anywhere, I'm not even looking. If I just do that same exact pattern of whole steps and half steps, that's a major scale. Okay, every different type of scale that you've heard of is simply a unique pattern on its own of whole and half steps. You can imagine there's a lot of ways that you could put those together. So that's really what a scale is. It's going to be important for our discussion here today. And so, in the Legend of Zelda theme, we're really dealing with 3 different scales, believe it or not. And I'm going to show you the patterns for those. So, the first scale is going to be the one that I just played, the major scale. Here's the pattern. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now we're going to use this to actually build specific scales. We're going to use a minor scale. Here's that pattern. Whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. It would sound like this. That's a minor scale. Notice, don't worry about what the names of the notes are. That's irrelevant for right now. It's really not that important. And we have one more scale that we're going to use that we call Phrygian. That goes half, whole, whole. Like so. We call that Phrygian. Fairly common, not as common as major and minor, but lots of songs are based on that. Okay. Now, if we take a note and we use it as our starting note and we simply follow this pattern, that will generate the notes in a particular scale. Let's take major, for example. Now, in the actual Zelda theme song, which I'm going to play in a little bit, little recording, in the classic 8-bit Nintendo soundtrack, the root note or the starting note of the scale, the major scale that's featured in the main theme, is a B flat. So here's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to follow this pattern here. Okay. Let's take a B flat. Whole step brings us to the note C. Whole step brings us to the note D, just following the pattern. Half step, E flat. Whole, F. Whole, G. Whole, A. Half step back to B flat. So that's what we call our B flat major scale. Now there's a term in music that we call parallel scales. Okay, so what does this mean? Parallel scale means, hey, if we take the note B flat and we do a B flat major scale, and then let's say we take the same note, B flat, and we build a B flat minor scale using the other pattern, and then we take a B flat and we build a B flat Phrygian scale. That's what we mean by parallel. Same note, 3 different sound patterns, 3 different scales. B flat major, for example. B flat minor. And B flat Phrygian. Now, why is that important? Because the center of gravity, kind of the sun that all the other notes orbit around, lots of different little analogies you can use, is the same note. So your listener is going to always hear that boom as kind of what we call the tonal center of the song. That's going to be very important coming up here. So if we take those particular scales there and we start them with B flat, those patterns, as you can see, we end up with a lot of flat notes. Now, nothing wrong with that, but what I'm going to do to make this a bit easier for all of you to follow along is I'm going to, instead of starting those scales on the note B flat, I'm going to simply start them on the note A, which is a half step lower. Why? It's going to be a bit more, first of all, guitar friendly for those of you who play guitar, and secondly, just a little less what we call accidentals flats and sharps to deal with, because all this stuff is relevant to any type of scale, not just in particular the B flat, because the scale is really whole step, half step, etc. If you were sound asleep and somebody woke you up and said, "Hey, what scale is this?" All right, you're not going to start going, "I hear an E, I hear an F sharp, I hear a G." No, you're going to say, "Oh, that sounds minor to me." Okay, so what you're really hearing are these movements. You're hearing the distances between the notes. You're not hearing really E, F sharp, G, A, B, that kind of a thing. That's great. These are mental constructs we've created so that we can talk about all this stuff, organize it. It's brilliant. But that's not really what you're hearing. You're hearing the pattern. So if we simply follow these patterns, but we start on the note A, it's going to be indistinguishable to your listener. Okay, if we're making the Zelda theme song out of this set of notes versus the B flat set of notes. So here's what we have. As you can see there, we have A major, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, A minor, that's the whole, half, whole, etc. Here's A Phrygian, and I followed the Phrygian pattern. So you can consider this to really be the raw material that the Zelda theme song is made out of. So our next topic here is chords, because it's going to be a mix of chords and scales that make up the theme here. So the chords in the song, and I will start with the B flat for now, because that's, as I said, going to sound exactly like the recording itself, the first original soundtrack. There's my rendition for it. So anyway, it's important to do this on a stripped down basis. Just the chord progression I did plus the melody is the core foundation. All these soundtracks you might have heard where they take that original theme and they've made orchestral versions out of it. They've made heavy metal versions out of it. They've made jazz versions of it. All that stuff is just stylistic difference, okay? It's still all built on this core foundation of that chord progression and the notes themselves. That's important to keep in mind. So we're here to understand foundationally, how does it all work together? Because then you can do all kinds of cool creative things with it. So let's get started with that. Okay, so if you ask most guitar players, what is a chord? Well, a lot of times what you're going to hear is a chord is 1-3-5. Chord is 1-3-5. Well, it's not a very good way to think about it, quite honestly, right? And I'm going to be giving you a lot of information very quickly coming up here, so I'll do my best to try and explain it clearly. But of course, we have a limited amount of time with a video like this, so you can always visit Metal Guitar Academy for more in-depth information. Okay, so what really is a chord? 1-3-5, it's not going to cut it. And I'm not going to get into it right now, but not a good way to think about it. A chord really is, again, at the most foundational level, a chord has to have at least 3 notes. You can have more, but we have to have at least 3 notes in a specific relationship to one another. Okay, so I can't just do something like this. Here's 3 notes and go, okay, that's a chord. Now that might have a cool sound to it. Not saying that's not cool, not musical. It's not what we'd really call a chord traditionally. Okay. Now we talked about this term interval, which meant just the distance between any 2 notes. Intervals generally are going to be referred to with numbers. Okay, so let's say I started with the note A. We call that 1. If I went A, B, C, that's what we call a third. A to C would be a third. Or if I started with the note D, D, E, F, okay, that would be a third. Even the half step and the whole step, those are common names for those very small intervals. Those, in fact, can be called seconds. If I went like this, A, B, a whole step, well, A, B, that's 2 notes. We call that a second. Now let's use that as an example, in fact. And we need a little bit more of a refined way to talk about intervals. As you notice up here, this says the interval of a third is important for chords, but there are 2 types of thirds. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Take this seconds, A to B. That's all well and good. But what if I wanted to play a B flat, which is the half step? Well, how do we call that in terms of numbers? Because that's still two notes, isn't it? A, B flat. Well, we can't just call that a second because there's no way to differentiate it from the A to the B. It's a different sound. This is where we get the words major and minor from. If I have the slightly bigger interval, A, B, we call that a major second. If I have the smaller, A, B flat, still two notes, but we call that a minor second. So that's where we get the terms. Now, that relates to just about every kind of interval, especially major and minor third. Right? So notice I have this little formula here. Major third equals whole step plus whole step. I'm going to show you that in a moment. Minor third equals whole step plus half step. This is a very, very good way to quickly figure out thirds. So let's say I'm going to take that note A again. If I travel one whole step, two whole step, and we just do the leap, you don't want to play the notes in between, it just starts sounding like a scale. If we do this leap, it's got that little happy kind of a sound. That's the sound of a major third. That's just what it sounds like. If I do that distance anywhere, similar sound. Same with the scale. Your brain isn't going, oh, I hear an A to a C sharp. No, you're hearing this distance between two notes, and it's giving you that sound that you've recognized your whole life. Now, if we simply go whole step plus half step, very different sound. It's got that darker kind of minor sound, doesn't it? We call that a minor third. Again, you do that anywhere. It's the distance that you're hearing. So because of that, we can use those distances really to generate any kinds of thirds that we want. Now, going back to this, we said that a chord, by definition, has to have three different notes, but in a specific relationship to one another. So here is that relationship. Okay? By stacking up two thirds in a row, this is how we get or end up with the three notes in a chord. So for example, let's say that we did a major third plus a minor third. I like these little formulas. They're easy to remember. If we do that, well, let's see what we get. I'm going to start with the note A again. Here's a major third. Now from here is what I mean by stacking them up. I'm just going to do another one. Major third. Now, whole step, half step, that's a minor third. Put those together. Well, gee, that sounds like a major chord, doesn't it? That is not some hack or trick or any kind of bullshit like that. That's at the most foundational level. That's what a chord is. So it's important to understand things at that level. Otherwise, you're going to miss the boat. Okay, so that's very important there. That little sound pattern, major third plus minor third, that is what a major chord really is. What if we flip it around? I'm going to do the minor third in the beginning, the step and a half, and then from there I'm going to do the major third, the two whole steps. Let's see how that sounds. Well, that sounds like a minor chord, doesn't it? That's just what a minor chord is, again, foundationally. Now, we can put these together. There's a couple other ways to do it. I'm not going to worry about it for this video. Again, you can do two minor thirds, you do two major thirds, but we're just going to stick with these two right now, the major chord and the minor chord. So let's jot those down here. Major chord. Boy, you must really like Zelda if you're sticking through this. Listen, we're gonna, put this all together for you. This is very important stuff, though. If you want to be an accomplished musician or even just enjoy music more, knowing this stuff is great. Okay, it's really builds a very solid foundation here. So, major chord equals major third plus minor third, and a minor chord equals minor third plus major third. Okay. So one of the cool things about these formulas is that regardless of whether you're dealing with a scale or not, you could build any chord you want totally from scratch. If I wanted an E minor chord, I could go, okay, here's an E, minor third brings me to this note there, major third brings me to that note there. That gives you a roadmap. Now all you have to do is figure out what those notes are. Oh, E, that's a G, that's a B, bam. That's an E minor chord. Didn't reference 1, 3, 5, anything like that with a scale. Okay, this is the very most important way first to build chords. Now, that being said, scales and chords are very, very related. You can think of them like two sides of the same coin, in fact. We can see that illustrated here. Here is an A major scale. Started with A, used the whole and half step formula to build that scale. Now let's check this out. What we've got here, if I start with the note A and I just decide to follow this little formula here, well, actually, I'm putting the cart before the horse. If I just look at the scale here and I decide to go, okay, A, I'm going to jump a third, 1, 2, 3, that's a C sharp. And then from this one, I go, okay, 1, 2, 3. By definition, that has to give us the notes in a chord, right? Because we started with a note, we moved a third, and then we moved another third, stacked up 2 thirds. If we look at the actual types of thirds, we get major third, A to B is a whole step, B to C sharp is a whole step. So 2 major thirds, 2 whole steps gives us that major third sound. Now, the other third we get here happens to be a minor third, doesn't it? Remember, we're just dealing with the specific notes in this scale. So we are going to, in a sense, be restricted to those notes. So you're going to have these naturally occurring major thirds or minor thirds. You can't just decide, oh, I'm going to do, make this a C natural or something. No, you're dealing with this set of notes. So moving a third automatically is a minor third here if we do it from C sharp. There's our half step, there's our whole step. So the notes A, C sharp, and E generate for us an A major chord, and you can hear it. Now here's the cool thing, and again, I'm giving you a lot of info here. You can always rewatch this and try and absorb it. But cool thing about this is if you have a scale, you can do that with any of the notes here as a starting note or a root note. Let's say, for example, I wanted to start with the note D. I'm going to make D my starting note here. Well, what would the notes be if we move by thirds? 1, 2, 3, F sharp, and then from the F sharp, 1, 2, 3, D, F sharp, A. What does that sound like? Sounds major. We can confirm it. D to E is a whole step. E to F sharp is a whole step. So there's our major third. F sharp to G sharp is a whole, but G sharp to A is a half. F sharp to A is a minor third. So again, our formula, major third plus minor third, you always end up with a major chord. One of the tricky things here is, unfortunately, we have to use the same words, major and minor, for the intervals, the thirds, but also the resulting 3-note chords. It makes it a little bit tougher at first, but not too bad. Okay, so the deal is we could do that with every single note here. So that means, very importantly, that we end up with 7 unique chords generated from the one scale. Now there's a way to identify these. Believe it or not, we can use in music Roman numerals as identifiers, as ways to basically label the types of chords, major, minor, and there's one called diminished that we're not going to worry about too much today. But Roman numerals to identify types of chord. So because we're going to use Roman numerals to label or identify types of chords, we need a way to differentiate between major and minor. So the deal is big Roman numerals are used to identify major chords, and small Roman numerals are used to identify minor chords. There's a type of chord called diminished, like I said, not a big deal for today. But let's take a look at this. Okay, so here's our A major scale, and we can see here that I've put a big Roman numeral 1 underneath it. Remember when we built this chord, when we said, oh look, A to C sharp, that's a major third, C sharp to E, that's a minor third, that gave us major chord. So we just plop a big Roman numeral under that, and we can look at that now at a glance and go, A major chord. It's there to identify it. B, D, F sharp. Those are the 3 notes in a row that if we play them sound like, and because of our formula, are a minor chord. So we're simply labeling this with a little 2. Little is going to mean minor. So if I go on in this fashion as I've done here, we can, again, at a glance now, we can look at this and we can see what are the types of chords that are going to naturally be built from this particular scale. So we have A major, I wrote them a little bit more kind of standard way down here. A major, B minor, C sharp minor, D major, E major, F sharp minor, G sharp diminished. By the way, G sharp, a diminished chord is simply 2 minor thirds in a row. So if I did this, that's one way to stack up thirds, right? 2 minor thirds in a row. That gives us the sound of what we call diminished. That's just what a diminished chord is. So this G sharp happens to do that. That's why it's got a little circle here. So these are the 7 chords that naturally occur by doing the thirds, stacking them up, and we can label them with these Roman numerals. Now I'm going to play these for you so you can hear them. And what's going to happen is it's going to kind of sound like a scale, but played with chords. Right? So did something like this. Okay. A major, B minor, C sharp minor, D major, E major, F sharp minor, G sharp diminished, and then back to cool part about this is because all of those 7 chords are coming from just the 7 notes of that scale, it's like this big matrix in your head that you're hearing of all those 7 notes over and over, different combinations. And so they automatically sound good together when you put those particular chords together in what we call a chord progression. This is the essence of how people are coming up with songs like the Zelda theme. It's created, the melody is often created sort of on a bed of these chords. This is not specifically Zelda theme, but if I took something like this, I was just going to play A major, E major, how many songs have that? Like 10 billion, right? I'm just choosing 3 out of those 7 chords. We could call that particular progression a 1, A major, 6, F sharp minor, 5. So we're going to be referring to the chord progressions with Roman numerals. The good news, this set of Roman numerals is going to work with any major scale. I could write out, let's say, an E major scale or a G major scale. As long as you got the notes right, you can just go boom, major 1, minor 2, minor 3. You can just put those same Roman numerals under any major scale. That's what's really cool about it as well. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm simply going to take the other 2 scales that are being used in the Zelda theme song, the A minor scale and the A Phrygian scale, and I'm just going to do the same process. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to build those chords with thirds, and what you're going to see is we're going to end up with a different set of Roman numerals for those different types of chords. But the overall methodology here, the overall thought process is exactly the same. We're just going to end up with a different set, a different order of chords for different scales. Okay, so here are the Roman numerals that we would get for all 3 of these. Remember, we call these parallel scales. And if you take a little look at the bottom of the screen there, or the bottom of the tab, because the note A is kind of the home base, you can think of it like for the ears. A lot of these chords that you see here can be mixed and matched quite liberally. That means as long as we kind of meander our way back to A, whether it's an A minor chord or an A major chord, you're really going to be able to mix and match these things because A is like your home base. If you did a chord progression just from any one of these 3 exclusively, you're still going to make your way back to the A. That's going to sound like your 1 chord, your main chord. So now, if we take a look at the chords here in the Zelda theme, and remember I've changed this to A, right, instead of B flat, so that we could look at those particular scales. Now we can start to see where these chords actually come from, why they work together. The little intro to the main theme, okay? Right. What are those? A major. I'm just doing bar chords. Remember, cool part about knowing the notes and the chords as well is you could find those 3 notes, A, C sharp, E, any kind of cool way you wanted to on the guitar. That's how people, by the way, make those arrangements you often see on YouTube, like the classical guitar arrangements or things like that. As I was saying before, earlier in this, if you know foundationally what's going on, structurally what's going on, you can then go on to make a lot of different stylistic things with these. So that's what's happening with these arrangements you see, solo guitar arrangements. Okay, so what we have here, let's check it out. First chord, A major. Ah, well, of course, that's our 1 chord here from the A major scale. Boom. Our next chord in the progression, in the song, is a G major. Well, wait a minute. Where the hell's that coming from? There's no G at all. There's a G sharp in this scale. What is this? Well, let's take a look at the A minor scale. Uh-oh, there it is. The A minor scale generates a G major chord, G, B, D. Next chord is F major in the progression. Lo and behold, there it is, right there in the A minor scale. That's our 6th chord. And then it goes E major. That doesn't work. But back here, A major scale, the key of A major. Lo and behold, boom, that 5 chord is an E major. That's why this works. You're going to hear this in a lot of different pop songs, rock songs, metal songs. I mean, I could list a whole bunch, but I want to stay focused here on this. But this is how people are often just getting out of only staying within one single scale. That's fine, but it sounds a little more interesting, right? We call this borrowing often, borrowing a chord from another scale. Okay. Always want to make sure if you're doing that though, that it is a parallel scale. That's important. Can't just be some random scale. The point is your home base here is A. Excellent. So now here is the actual 8-bit soundtrack, just the first part here for the main theme. And remember, I've digitally transposed it. That simply means I've brought it down a half step. Everything else is exactly the same. But instead of having the main note be B flat, I've brought it down a half step to A. So I'm just going to play the chords a little bit with it here. So there it is. Now let's check out the chords in that second part. We already looked at the chords in the first little intro part. It starts the same. All right, here they are, chords. Main part here. A major, G major, F major, C major, B flat major, A minor, D major. We're going to get to that as our kind of our last topic here. That's an important chord. Special case, and then E, and then it starts again. Cool. So where are these coming from? Scroll up a little bit here. Okay, the A major chord. Of course, here's our good old 1 chord from the A major scale. Next chord, just like the intro part, was the G major. We can see that's coming from the A minor scale. F major, also coming from the A minor scale. Now here, C major, that's a new chord for us. Also coming from the A minor scale. So there's a lot in the A minor here, right? It's also present in this A Phrygian scale, but there's no need to say, hey, we're switching to Phrygian because it's a common chord. Notice it's also present here. So G major, F major, C major, all coming from A minor scale. Here's a cool chord, B flat major. Where the heck is that coming from? Now we can turn our attention to the Phrygian scale. Minor 1, half step above to a major 2. So a minor chord going up a half step to a major chord. That's a very kind of cool, common sound in a lot of songs. Okay, so whether it's this or a pop song or a metal song, you're going to hear that in a lot of songs, metal kind of stuff. And so again, the stuff is sort of stylistically neutral, okay? It's style agnostic. Learning this material, you can apply it to anything, any style at all. Okay, so that's the main theme itself. Now, we have selected this B, or I've circled this B, because if we're looking here, B major, there's nary a B major to be found here whatsoever. Okay, in the key of A major scale, that's a B minor chord. Okay, in the next one, the A minor scale, that's a diminished chord, and in the Phrygian, there's no B at all. In fact, it's actually a B flat. So this brings us to a topic called secondary dominant chords, which is pretty cool. Now, when it comes to our Roman numeral progressions, there's a particularly important one, the 5 to the 1. We call this particular chord progression a cadence. There's some other kinds of cadences out there, but this is a very special one, very common one of the stronger ones. Now, a cadence in music is essentially where you're setting up something to sound very resolved. So you're setting up some turbulence, you're setting up some instability, and then it's going to be resolved. Now, you can do that a number of ways, but the most common way is through chord progressions. 5-1, for example, E major is our 5 chord here in the A major scale. Going to an A major, which is the 1 chord, would be 5-1. You hear that chord progression all over the place. If you listen to any kind of a symphony, you know, think of a Beethoven symphony, the end, the big finale, is going to be some sort of kind of variation on. Sounds very resolved. Okay. And again, we can see that happening here, in particular with our A major scale there. So 5-1 chord progression is of special significance. It really makes the 1 chord sound final. Okay. Now, how is that relevant to Zelda or other pieces of music for that example? Well, we can kind of leverage that tendency of a 5 chord resolving to a 1 chord, and we can actually set up kind of a situation where we have a secondary 5-1 relationship. Okay, this is the primary one, 5-1, E major to A major, because it's naturally occurring here. But let's say we wanted to pick one of our other chords, which I'm now going to fill in here. I'm going to fill in the other ones: B minor, C sharp minor, D major, F sharp minor. Here's your diminished chord, back to major. Okay. Let's say that we wanted one of these other chords here to sound like, okay, a more important chord, to almost temporarily sound like the 1 chord. E major, for example. Let's say we wanted E major essentially to pretend that it was the 1 chord temporarily. Well, let's do it. Let's say that E was in fact the 1 chord. We said that the 5-1 relationship, going from the 5 chord to the 1 chord, really makes the 1 chord sound special. So the question here would be, if E was 1, what note would be 5? Let's think about it. E, F, G, A, B. B major. If I play a B major chord and then I go to an E major chord, that's a 5-1 progression. Doesn't that make the E major sound sounds like your 1 chord, like the main chord? Okay. That's what's going on in the Zelda theme. Okay. In the Zelda theme, remember we had these particular chords. The main part, right? Bum, bum, bum. B major. We singled that one out because there's no B major anywhere. So what's going on? We are simply throwing that chord in on purpose so that we can set up E major to sound temporarily more important. We call this being a secondary 5-1 relationship. Okay. The important thing to remember is we could pick any one of these chords to do that with. Why the 5 chord here? It's basically to extend that sense of tension and resolution. The 5 chord ultimately is going to resolve to the A major, right? So we have, but what if we pad that out a little bit? If we load up a B major chord before the E major, we set up essentially this dual tension and resolution. So we get this effect. finally resolves to your A major. That's what's going on here. Again, very commonly done. This is not some kind of just classical music or just video game. You're going to see this a lot in a lot of kinds of music, pop music, rock music, all kinds of things. That's where that B major comes from. And it's a nice effect, isn't it? It's a little bit unexpected. The reason it's unexpected and sounds interesting is because a B major chord has the notes B, D sharp, F sharp. So if that was that, B would be the 5. B major is B, D sharp, F sharp. The note D sharp is nary to be found here in our A major scale. In fact, it's in none of these 3 scales. So if we throw that chord in, that's what makes that really cool sounds unexpected and resolves to that E major. Okay? So there's actually a little symbol and a little name that we call that. We would call that B major chord in this case, the 5 of 5. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? It's a secondary 5 chord. The primary 5 chord, the real 5 chord in the key of A major is E major, but this is 5 of the E major. It has that resolution sound. And then the 5 resolves back to like so. Okay, so very quickly, because that's really the main idea here. We've accounted for all the chords by using these parallel scales. Okay. Now the last little bit, and we'll use that as an example, the melody. And where are these melody notes coming from? Well, they're simply coming from the notes in the scale. Okay, so great example here. If you have a chord that gets dropped in there, notice when that part comes in, that's when you hear this. B, C sharp, D sharp matches with the D sharp in the chord. When you have these chords, the F major, the G major, F major, those we pulled from the A minor scale, so you'll notice in the melody that at that point, the notes in the melody are more being pulled from the A minor scale versus the A major scale. So that's where we're getting the melodic stuff from. Okay, now, that was a lot of information. I find it very fascinating. I think it's a fun way to get into these things because, as I said, everybody's heard these songs. A lot of people have enjoyed playing that particular game. So there you have it. Enjoy. If you want more information, of course, metalguitaracademy.com, whether it's this YouTube channel or the website itself. I am Brett Miller. Enjoy. And of course, keep shredding and keep learning. I'll see you next time.